Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be answering your questions. We asked our listeners for just some topics they'd like to hear us chat about. And on social media, we asked on our Facebook group, on Blue Sky a while back, and have some of those left over from the last Mailbag episode that we did. But then we also asked on our Patreon account to our supporters this week and got some more questions. In fact, way more questions than we can cover today. So we'll cover a decent amount today, and then we've got plenty for the next episode that we want to do like this. So we're going to jump right into this. We don't need to do a poll because we're going to get the conversation going with you through your questions here. So the first question that our listeners asked today, and by the way, these are all board game related, so don't worry. You're not going to have to hear personal stuff about us or anything like that. We're still going to stay on topic.
Thank goodness. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to learn about you guys.
Nobody wants to hear that.
All right. So the first question was from Omar, and he said, what mechanics do each of you find you gravitate towards, for better or worse, when evaluating games you want to try or buy? For myself, I keep wanting to pick up games with multi-use cards, even knowing how difficult it is to get these games played.
Well, first of all, multi-use cards are great. So I get it. You're going to be holding something during the game and having to flip through and kind of see where that's going to go out there in some way or another. So multi-use cards are fantastic. That's a great pick. But what I look for even more, I think, is a type of interaction that's going to happen through the game. So not necessarily, is that a mechanism or mechanics? I want to know what type of interaction between the players is going to be first and foremost. And then also I look for something where the systems integrate with each other nicely. And integrate with a theme, hopefully. So I don't want to have, deck building for the sake of deck building and then some little rondelle over here that has nothing to do with the deck building. I want the deck building to be dependent on which slot I'm in the rondelle. Maybe that rondelle lets me cut a card in addition to some other action that I get to do. So if all this stuff works together nicely, or the deck building is dependent on the space that I'm taking on the board, which helps me work up some tech track. So how the things integrate, and if that matches up with theme, that's one thing I look for. I mentioned holding the cards. Tactility is super important for me too. It becomes more and more important. It can be like Abduction. Why do I like that game so much? A lot of it is the tactility. You got this goofy UFO. Part of it is sitting at the table for me, grabbing these things out. You get to arrange them. So I really do enjoy that tactility and the way games feel. So that's a big bonus for me, more so than mechanism sometimes. And what else? That's it. Those are the three kind of highlights. I'm sure there's more stuff, but I will cut myself off right there.
Just,
I feel like I need to point out that... Go ahead.
In my head, I just designed that game that Adam's talking about, that deck building rondelle game. I want to play it now. I just got to get a theme on it and we're all set to go.
I feel like I need to point out that this is the second time in 3 episodes that Adam has brought up abduction. And one of them was about racism. So I know what can you say about this?
I feel like it used to be Azul. I think now it's abduction. That's all we're going to hear about for months.
Such a goofy game.
Yeah, for me, I look for rondelles for the sake of rondelles and deck building for the sake of deck building, because that's just how I roll. No, that's not true. Not entirely true anyway. But let me just start with talking about the multi-use card thing, because I thought that was a great call out. And if it wasn't for the fact that was in the question, I might have actually said that. I've been loving multi-use cards. And in fact, last week's review game, Daybreak, was a great use of multi-use cards. And so that's a terrific call out. But to be a little bit more creative than that, I think I'll mention a couple of other ones. One is bag building. I think bag building is a great mechanism. It always leads to these fun moments where you're pulling things and you're pushing your luck. I mean, a couple of great examples that come to mind. You got Wonderland's War, you've got Quacks of Quedlinburg. That just leads to these standing at the table kind of moments that everybody loves to have.
Hyperborea is a good bag building game.
Yeah, I know. The other is deck building, although not just deck building for the sake of deck building. There has to be some other connection to the game. But I do love deck building. If I see deck building on the list of mechanisms for a game, I'm probably pretty interested in finding out more about what that game's got going on. So those are a couple of big ones. And also to, again, endorse the multi-use card thing.
Well, you took my thunder with deck building. It is interesting. Anytime I see deck building in a game, it makes me interested in it because I think it can be such a fun mechanism, but it often doesn't really thematically work very well. And so I've found a lot of deck building games that I've tried or played just haven't really hit the mark for me. So, but I want to keep trying them every time I see one. I find the promise of that concept, and some of them have been really great. The other one that I was thinking of though is I like kind of unique action selection games where the idea of what you're doing on your turn is maybe there's unique restrictions to it. It's not just like, obviously I like worker placement just fine, but that's used so often for action selection. So when somebody finds a way to give you the choices you can make, like I was thinking of Nucleum, for example, where they gave you those little tiles that you play at the top, or put it out on the board, and it really restricts what actions you can take based on the tiles you've got, but you can change those up. Like just anytime a game can do action selection in an interesting way, I definitely want to play around with it. They don't all work, of course. That's why people go back to worker placement, because it's so straightforward and it makes a lot of thematic sense. But yeah, I mean, I was going to say that those action selection mechanisms, a lot of those times don't make any thematic sense at all. Definitely not like worker placement does, but they can be really fun to play with. So I like the restrictions built into those. So that's usually something that's going to trigger me. But otherwise, I couldn't really think of too much that I see a specific mechanism say, oh, I got to try that game. Those are kind of the only two places that I do that very often. All right. Well, the next question was from Jesse, and they said, what are your feelings on board games becoming video games and vice versa?
Well, I'm going to start out with kind of a poop answer on this one. I don't know if I have any certain feelings. I can't think of a video game that's been turned into a board game that I've enjoyed. Of course, there's Slay the Spire, which was basically a board game in video form anyway that became a board game. And that's having great success. So that's cool to see how that's working out. And I hear a lot of people super jazzed about that. But I've been waiting for Mass Effect. I think I heard they were going to come out with Mass Effect, the board game.
It was just out of Gen Con. I saw some pictures of it, and it looks to me, here's my hot take on it.
All right.
The pictures I saw, it looks like a streamlined Eric Lang game. He was one of the co-designers on it. So it's got kind of that, like, not huge, crazy, complicated production, simple player boards.
Yeah.
And I read it's a little bit of a kind of a campaign with a simple gameplay to it. So
is it a co-op too? I think I heard it was a co-op.
That's probably but probably is.
That's well, they listened to our episode about which IPs to turn, and they're using my idea. So that's fantastic. But yeah, so I am excited. If something did come along like Mass Effect that turned into a board game, I would love to see how that plays out and if it's actually fun. I'm not going to go out and buy it right away. I know there's a couple. What's the one where the guy goes and hunts monsters and stuff? I think that was a video game. It was a TV show for sure. And then they became, I had Superman, and he was like, I'm gonna go kill the monsters, and like a weird
The Witcher.
The Witcher.
Yeah, yeah, there we go.
Yep.
So that is out in board game form. Did that start as a video game?
Yes, it was a video game series. It might have actually been a novel. I think it might have been books before it was a video game series, but I'm not positive on that. I know there was books and a video game series before there was a TV series about it.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So the board game's out now too, and people seem to be loving that one. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess The Expanse, there's a video game of that now too, but it has not. That came after the board game, and I looked into it a little bit, and I decided not to pursue it. I have The Expanse board game back here. It's fantastic. So mixed feelings, I guess. Indifferent feelings. I'll take note. If I hear one is going one way or the other, I'll take note, I guess.
Yeah, my answer is kind of the same on that one. I don't think I have any preconceived notions. I'll try to judge every game on its own merit. And the one thing that I would be, I think, cognizant of if I saw that a game was being made from a board game to a video game or vice versa is the person who's doing that just trying to cash in on an IP for the sake of cashing in. I mean, that's, I think, a definite possibility. If you've got a super popular game that translates into another format, are they going to do justice to the original? And, some obviously do. Like from what I've heard, Slay the Spire is very good. The one example that I can think of that I've played, which is ironic because it's not the kind of thing that you'd think of as being a particularly exciting translation, was This War of Mine, which started out as a video game and was translated over into a board game. I mean, I'm still not quite sure who made that decision, but they did, and I thought that the board game was actually quite good. Now, I never played the video game, so I have nothing to compare it to, but I was certainly pretty impressed by the board game. Now, I think we've talked before about how that's not exactly what you would call a fun experience. It's more of an experience, but still, I would say the translation was worthy. It was something worth playing. The other examples I can think of where there's a translation, well, actually, there's the main one, and this, I think I brought it up before, is one that I've never actually seen. I don't know if it was, it's not very high on the BGG list. In fact, I think it's somewhere right around 6,000. So it's clearly not a game that, is going to be breaking into the top 20 anytime soon. It's a game called Mule for multi-use labor element. I think I brought this up on like a retro or kind of nostalgia episode, but it was a board game that is translated from a video game that I played back in the 1980s when I was in high school on my Commodore 64. Great game, super fun. It's actually a game that very, I think, closely adheres to a lot of board game type of rules. It's the kind of thing that translates very quickly. It's a resource management. You're buying, you're selling, and you're trying to colonize this planet and build resources. So all the things that we love doing in board games, you do in the video game of Mule. So I'm guessing, even though I've never played it, that it's probably a pretty good adaptation. It's still one after all these years that I want to try, but just have never gotten around to yet. Probably because I don't think anybody actually owns this game.
Yeah, I think of video games a lot the same way I think of any IP being translated into a different medium, and that obviously it's there to make money. Whoever originally licensed the IP, if in this case a video game publisher probably said, yes, you can use this license and you pay me a royalty on it. So I want to make money off it. The designer probably thought, or the publisher who's going to make it is going to say, this is going to make me a lot of money, so I'm going to pay extra percentage of it to the board game, to the video game publisher. So everybody's there to make money on it, but I think they're all probably done with the intent of making a game that both their fans will enjoy and hopefully reaches a larger market. And the reality is that usually doesn't happen. I mean, I think this is true of almost any video games translated to movies usually fail. They're usually not good. Borderlands that came out this last week, it was apparently a good example, sitting at 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I think the same thing is usually going to happen with board games, or at least traditionally. However, I think we're getting better. Hobby board games, the publishers that are getting the licenses to IPs are just getting better at designing games. They're not the mass market game publishers that they used to try them and didn't really, didn't have a love for it. They were just going after, what do we think can sell a billion copies in our stores. So I think the possibility is there now. Now, as far as something like Slay the Spire, where it, like you said, it was basically a board game in a video game format. And then someone took that and turned that video game into the exact same board game, but made it more work to maintain because you've got to upkeep all this stuff the computer used to do before. I don't know why I would choose to play a board game version of something that's more approachable on a screen. But then again, I'm not really the perfect audience for this answer for this question, because I'm not a video gamer these days anymore. But let me give you some examples. I used to be a big console gamer, 10, 15 years ago. One of my favorite IPs, Fallout. And there were several Fallout games made, but the kind of the key Fallout game, which is supposed to replicate that experience, sounds like it turned out to be kind of a clunky mess, because you're trying to reproduce somebody walking around the wastelands and shooting monsters and finding adventures on a board game. And it's just it's hard to reproduce that type of thematic experience, or that kind of storytelling experience in a board game with mechanisms. And of course, most of these games, if they're story based, they tend to be cooperative games, which is not really my cup of tea. So I would say I'm generally kind of indifferent about it. Things like Mass Effect, where they pulled, Eric Lang got involved with it. That's great. They got a great designer in there to produce something that people love. Adam, you're a fan of the series. You might love it, just even if it's a cooperative game, because if it's well designed, you have a relationship to the story, maybe to the characters, things like that. So it's, hopefully fans are getting what they want when they get a video game, but otherwise I don't really care that much.
So is Jesse also asking digital implementations of board games? Is he wondering what about Dune Imperium app? I heard that's excellent, and they're getting one of the expansions coming up on that pretty soon. So, or is he talking about also Board Game Arena, where basically we have all these digitized board games we can just play on our phone, and it's kind of like a little video game right there too, right? So I don't know if he's talking about those two generally.
Well,
I'm in
Jesse's not here
favor
to
of it.
ask Adam, so you just have to guess.
I know. So if he is asking about that, I'm going to pretend that he wants to know about that too. I'm generally in favor. The more I can have access, the more people can have access to games and be able to play them, see how the mechanisms work. I think that's great because then you can be like, oh, hey, try this on the app. There's a tutorial. And then we can come hang out in my place and give it a shot in real life, and you see what you think. Then I don't have to teach you very much, or I can just, fill in the gaps if you have any questions about the rules. So that's kind of a cool way to learn a game or get people involved as well. So I've seen that, like Azul, that's online in a bunch of different places, and I got a buddy hooked down the road. So that'll be great. I'm in favor of board games being digitized, if Jesse even cares about what I think about that.
I'll just second that one. I think that's also a great thing to do.
Yep, I'll in for that. That's when I'm on a flight. That's usually what I'm doing, is playing a board game on my tablet against AI.
By the way, one quick thing before we move on off of that, I want to go back to my comment about the Mule board game again, because I looked it up on BGG, and the publisher of the Mule board game back in 2015 was Loudapellet.fi, which we know from
Eclipse. Yeah,
from Eclipse. Yeah. So who knew? Maybe it's higher quality than IE gave it credit for.
Maybe you're waiting for second Mule for the Galaxy.
Second Mule for the Galaxy, yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, the next question came from Lindsay and DJ, and they said, what makes a good rule book to you? Now, we did talk about bad rule books being one of our pet peeves just a couple weeks ago, and probably, chatted very briefly about the things we don't like about it, but maybe you guys can answer what you do like about it.
It's a great question, and I came up with what I think is a great rulebook layout. You guys can pick it apart or agree with me. First, I want a little bit of intro and background, and if there's some key concepts I need to know, maybe lay those out right up front. I think that's great. Then I want a diagram of the setup. Just give me a big picture with, I love it when they have, this is A, put the little chips here, and it shows you in the picture A, and it has an arrow. Here's where the chips go. So, however many steps for setup, I like a big just picture of how everything's going to look on the table. And then once it goes into the rules, I want to know how to win. Here's the win conditions. This is what you need to do to win. Then give me a flow of play. So on your turn, you do this, A, B, C, D, or here's the actions. Here's what each of those means. And here's the little sub results of those actions. So give me the flow, and then give me examples. Show me what that means. Show me some of the little edge cases. I think some of the rule books do this fantastic, where they'll give you an example of the action, and they'll show the little pictures of it, but it might be some little edge case where there's like a tie and it goes to the next thing down. So it not only is it giving you the basic example, like, oh, that's great, but then here's a little more in depth in case this weird thing happens. So lay that out. And then I love when rulebooks do this too. They have like rules that are often overlooked, or like a FAQ, frequently asked questions section. That's great too, because like, oh, this is some rules that we'll probably miss during the flow of play. I love it when rule books have that little section, and to me it means that it's been play tested. The game's been play tested, and people have asked questions like, what happens here, oh, great question, I'll tell you, and I'll put it right here in this little section of sort of commonly occurring edge cases, if that's a thing. And then an index and a glossary in the back. So if I have a question about how to do movement action, or how does the empire ship work, I can look right there on the back of the rule book. Oh, page 17, here it is. Here's everything I need to know about that. So I have that quick reference available, and those are the steps to making a perfect rule book.
Well, Adam pretty much listed everything that I would have listed if I was giving my list on this. So let me try to recalibrate very quickly, and I'll come up with a new list. Okay. So rather than come up with a new specific list of things that I would want to see, let me talk a little bit more generally. I think the key to success is having the information laid out in a way that is intuitive. And I have a perfect example for this. Batman Gotham City Chronicles, which is, goes down in history. It is renowned for having one of the worst rule books ever done, was recently redone by Paul Grogan, and I am a complete fan of the new version versus the old version. And what it did was it made it intuitive to find the information that you're looking for. I think a lot of the things, Adam, that you mentioned are things that help you make it more intuitive. But I think that is the overall goal, is to make it so that if I'm going to have to go back to this rule book, how difficult is it going to be for me to be able to go in there and find the information that I'm looking for? And every game is going to be a little bit different because different games work in different ways. Like, for example, I'll use Batman Gotham City Chronicles again. There is a very specific set of things that happen when the heroes are taking their turns. There's a very different but very specific set of things that happens when the villain's taking their turns. So it was very intuitive to set up the rule book so that this is all the stuff that happens on a turn for a hero. This is all the stuff that happens on the turn for a villain. So I know exactly where to go if I'm one of those characters or the other. I know how to go and find what I'm looking for. The other thing, and this is not exactly the rule book, but I think it kind of falls in that same category. I think it's part of that same construct, is having a good player aid. And again, a perfect example there is Batman Gotham City Chronicles. People were desperately in need in that game after the first printing of a player aid. And so there was a bunch of them that I found on BGG where people just made their own, and they were actually pretty decent. But when they did the reprint and they put out the expanded instructional content, they included a whole bunch of additional player aids. And there they went all out. They gave a player aid for every different specific character that gave you the information that you needed to know. Not every game is going to do that, nor does every game need to do that, because not every game has that many specifics that change depending on a character that you're playing. But having something that is easy to reference as a player aid, I think, is great. Ideally not on a little player, a playing card size card, which a lot of games do, probably because that's the cheapest way to do it. But if you have something that can be a little bit bigger, and so you don't have to keep flipping things over or flipping back and forth between multiple cards, I think that helps. But having a book, an instruction book, where the information is organized intuitively and a good player aid, I think goes a long way towards success in terms of instructional material.
Yeah, I really hate when a player aid that you need to reference for the gameplay has stuff on both sides, and then it's sometimes it'd be like two cards. So I'm like, well, which side is actually going to help me right now? It's funny when they ask the question, what makes a good rule book? I was going to say blind play testers do. And I think that's an important part of a good rule book, but honestly, I don't know that they could give the feedback that's going to make a publisher relay it out or design it to really make it usable. At least then rules aren't missed. I had an interesting example last night. So a friend brought over Darwin's Journey, which is a fairly heavy game, but I wanted to refresh myself on the rules before he came over. So I pulled up the rule book online and I read through it, and I fully learned the game from the rule book. And I felt like, I haven't played it probably for a year and a half or something like that. So I really felt like I needed to learn it from scratch. And I felt like that taught me exactly how to play the game. But what was interesting is that when we were sitting down and playing it, we were trying to look up edge cases. We couldn't find anything we needed to actually reference in the book. And so in this case, they did a great job of teaching me how to play the game out of it, but didn't give me some of the important tools that I need to actually, use the rule book during the game, which I think especially more complex games kind of need to, because you're going to run into those edge cases or need to refresh your memory on how something works. And I couldn't even tell you as I was looking at it. It was just, I think it had actually a lot to do just with how the sections were laid out. There was no clear labeling of the, kind of the different actions. It was a lot of paragraphs of text, which again, when I read through, all made sense. So anyway, trying to, a rule book that handles both of those situations, teach me how to play and, give me a reference. Adam, you made a good point. Really, I want a rule book. It's great if it gives me a little flavor text about what we're doing. That's nice to have that, but it's not necessary. The most important thing for me is that I want to get that setup page, right? I want to get that page, that diagram that Adam's talking about with the steps around it on how to set up the board, where everything goes. Because once I, can get through that part, I've now learned the names of the components. Kind of internalize the layout of the board while I'm doing that. And that goes a long way to me as I start to read the rest of the rules to know kind of which sections I'm looking at and things like that. So give me a good setup section, that goes a long way. And then breaking the rule book down by, the types of actions you're doing, a clear section for each of those types of actions that kind of include the edge cases. I love what Adam also said about having some examples that get to those edge cases. Give me an example of this scenario, and then and it also did a tiebreaker, or and this person ran off the board. So what happens then, right? Kind of fill in some of those questions with that example. It's funny, a lot of the time the three of us will be on a game night, talking through like what happens in this case, and Adam will be like, oh, the rule book right here, there's an example that walks you right through it and shows exactly what happens. Great, we just got that question answered. So anyway, this is a hard thing to do. Interestingly, just this last week, there's a post on Blue Sky that I reposted. So if you want to take a look at this, go to our Blue Sky account and check out this post from looks like I posted it 5 days ago. I don't know, the 8/10 or something. And it's by this guy, Z said, and he had written some rule books already for published games. And people told him they had done great rule books. And then he said he went and took a grad school class on technical writing and then wrote a 90-page document called Every Rule Book is Awful. And in this document, he actually takes the On Mars rule book, which was, I think, heavily influenced by, I think Paul Grogan did a lot of the work on it. And but he kind of gave you examples of every place where he would change something or add something that would help you understand the flow of the game. So if you're really interested in digging in on this, go check that post out, because you can download the whole PDF on it. And it was pretty fascinating, just the thought process. I wonder if his next rule book will be better after writing all that. Apparently, I didn't get to it at the end, but apparently at the end, he actually has a full rule book for a published game that he kind of redesigned with these new concepts he learned. But I didn't get to that point, so I'm not sure how well it worked.
Interesting.
Did he make the case effectively that every rule book really is awful?
Well, I didn't read all 90 pages, so but I think at least to him it was, he was calling out all the things that were missing in what a lot of people consider to be an excellent rule book, which is the On Mars rule book. All right, next question was from Dan, and Dan asked, what games would you take on a trip that are appropriate to play outside? Example, camping and you can't play a game with a ton of cards that could get blown away.
Well, I can think of a few, but I'm going to name one that maybe you guys, I think Tim's played this one. I don't know about you, Chris. Hive is a game that is pretty good. It's just some hexagonal tiles of different little insects. Mostly, I think there's a spider in there too. So you got your occasional arachnid crawling around. But these are just relatively big or weighty. They're not going to get blown around by the wind. I think you just take a little pouch of, you look like one of those old, I don't know, medieval guys with a little pouch of coins, a pouch about that big that has all the tiles in it. You have a same colors for, like a black team and a white team. So black tiles and white tiles. And there may be, I don't know, 10 of each color, something like that. So you're heaving around 20 total tiles in a little pouch. You don't need a game board. You kind of spread out each other's, I don't know, if you don't know the game, it's available in lots of places. I think it's on Board Game Arena, but I think if you got a queen bee or something and you're trying to surround the bee with your pieces and they all move in different ways. A grasshopper can hop pretty far. I think the spider can only move around the outside like he's in a web or something. Then there's like a roly-poly can crawl on top of stuff. All these weird rules for the different insects. They give you a little bit of theme, but no, this game is basically a very abstract, almost chess-like game in the way these different pieces can move. It's okay. A lot of people love Hive, tons and tons and tons, and it is abstracty and chess-like. So if that's your jam, take a look at it. But for me, I wasn't any good at it, for one, so I kept getting my butt kicked by like easy mode on the AI, so that was frustrating. And it's just not my jam. I prefer a game that Chris is probably going to talk about next.
Well, the game I'm going to talk about is one that I've talked about a bunch of times, so it probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. It's Azul. And there's a couple different versions of Azul that you can play. And I mean base Azul. I'm not talking about like Summer Pavilion or any of that. I'm talking about just OG Azul. They've got the regular Azul. They've got Travel Azul, both of which are actually really good for travel because, kind of like Hive, they comes with big chunky pieces. You're not really trying to keep track. There are no cards. You're not really trying to keep track of any cards. There are the player mats. So hopefully you have a flat place to play the game. But even if you don't, if you have Travel Azul, then you've got a place to slot those little tokens in that aren't going to slide away. So that's great. And all you have beyond that is you have these little spots where you put the tiles, and you have the bag that they go in that you draw the tiles out of. So You have to have a little bit of space to play it, but you don't have to have a lot, and you don't have to worry about things blowing away. The other game that came to mind for me in terms of easy to play, easy to bring with you, is a fun little ditty called Love Letters, which Tim will probably get a chuckle out of, because I think when we first started playing games together, it was one of the first filler games he ever introduced me to, and I disliked it a great deal, and over the years learned to like it a great deal. But Love Letters is a card game, but at any given time, there's only a couple of cards out on the table. You have 2 in your hand, you're throwing one down, and you're drawing one. And that's all you're doing. So you don't have big piles of cards. You don't have tableaus you're trying to build up. You don't have anything that's going to get blown away by the wind. And it takes almost no footprint to play this game. But at the same time, it's got really interesting decisions to make. It's got some fun, head-to-head action when you're trying to, knock out another player by playing one of your cards. Super fun, quick, easy game to learn, and it takes almost no footprint and very easy to travel with. So there's a couple of good options for you.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of great choices here. Everything I was thinking of was like Azul, kind of abstract games, and they're just not my cup of tea. The one game that I've been traveling a lot with lately and seems to work pretty well is Sea Salt and Paper. I talk about this a lot, but it is cards, but it's one deck, 2 little discard piles, but you don't have to have cards all over the table. You can even hold them in your hand if you want to. So this is a game you could easily play, around a camp table, or out on a picnic blanket or whatever. So I think in most scenarios, something like that that's just a small deck of cards would be just fine. In fact, I guess like really any kind of small trick taking game, because they go so quick, you don't have it like a bunch of cards laid out on the table, would work pretty well for the most part.
Probably Voidfall. That's a good one to take out camping with you. It's easy to set up and take down, and not much going on there. So consider Voidfall.
Yeah, great. Perfect game. All right. Aaron asked, what tactics have you used to get a non-gamer interested in board game night?
Oh boy, I didn't see these questions, so I have to come up with the answer on the fly. What tactics have you used to get a non? Well, I've straight up kidnapped a few of my friends. I just come to them in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., so they have no clue. They're deep asleep, and I snatch them and throw them in my van, and then take them to my house and have a game set up. And
Bag over the head.
That hasn't, right? Secret location. So that hasn't gone over too well. No, I don't know. I need some more tactics. So I need some hints from you guys on how to do this. I try to, I don't want to like be like, this is my board game shelf. What do you think? And they're like, dude, you're a nerd. And then they just walk away. That's usually how it goes down. So far, I guess I'm mid-process on this. I've tried a few card games, Cat in the Box. What's the other one? Scout. So some of these games, if they like card games, maybe they'll go for the next game. So Cat in the Box has that little, now you're moving like resources, right? You're moving little things and put them on the board. So that's got them thinking about having to move around cubes. And then you think, what could be the next step after that, where it's kind of like a card game, but then you have to like maybe roll some dice in there too with that. So try to do the progression like that. I've gotten them as far as Cat in the Box. What's going to be the next step? This is the same couple that I've had try to play Wonderland's War. That didn't go over too well. One of them was like half dying and sick and probably shouldn't come over anyway. And so those are my tactics. Those are my go-to tactics. Start with the light ones. See if anything, see if they get hooked on anything. See if I can reel them in. And then maybe the next step will be show them some of my favorites. Get them to play smartphone or something. I'll probably turn them off from games forever, right, Tim?
Only the theme.
I haven't tried the bag over the head, throw them in the van thing yet, but maybe I should. Maybe that's why I'm failing at this. I'm just not trying. I'm not going aggressive enough. I also need to
Board
get a
Game
van.
Hot Takes does not endorse that tactic. Please do not use that.
No, I do have a couple of things. And it's, they've worked to greater or lesser degrees depending on the person. I think that there's a type of person that is going to be interested in board games, and it's almost impossible to take someone who really isn't the type and get them interested. So I think that any of us who try and fail shouldn't feel too bad about it, because, there's some people who just aren't going to be interested. But I think the things that I try to do, one of them is start with something relatively light. I think we've all probably been in that situation where we pick a super light game and we introduce somebody to it thinking this is going to be so easy. And even after the 5-minute rules teach, we still have the non-gamer saying, oh my God, that's so complicated. How do you guys play games like that? Even though it feels super simple to us. So I really try to go as light as I can at the beginning. The second thing is I try to go for excellence. I try to find something in the game that I think is likely to catch somebody's attention because there's something about it that's great. Like, for example, shamans, the combination of the quasi trick taking coupled with the interesting way that it handles social what's the word I'm looking for, social deduction. I think that's excellent. I think that's the kind of thing that rolls somebody into a game, and it's also a pretty light rule set, so I think that makes it easy. There are a bunch of games that I have, that I think do one thing or another really, really well that I bust out. Shaman just being one example. Another way that I try to get people interested is to, if I know there's something in particular that they're really into, that they're very interested in, and there's some game thematically tied to that, I think that's worth a shot. Like, for example, my brother-in-law, Paul, is now retired career journalist. And so I introduced him to Watergate, and that's like, a perfect game for somebody who spent their career as a journalist and who's a history buff to play a game like Watergate. And I think he really enjoyed it. And he's also the one who beats me at Ticket to Ride San Francisco when we go camping every summer. So that's an example of trying to get somebody pulled in by theme. And then the last thing, if I can get somebody into the game space, then I wouldn't say I try to let them win, but I play really light. I don't think about my turns. I basically go into it feeling like I kind of prefer if they do win because everybody likes to win. In fact, that's the thing that I think has been more successful for me than anything else, is even if the person doesn't seem to be enjoying themselves, once they win the game, I think they have a lot more fun. People love to feel clever. I love to feel clever. Everybody does. And if people can go into a situation like that feeling like, this isn't really my thing, but they come out victorious at the end of the game, nobody feels bad about that.
Yeah, good tactics there. I even usually start lighter than what you guys are talking about. So if it's really a group that, they haven't shown interest, like if I've talked about a game night and they haven't really shown interest at all, or maybe I haven't even talked about it, then it's a party game. And sometimes that's been enough. I actually have a really regular running group. We meet about once a month, and it's 6 of us, my wife and I, and then 4 friends. And when we started the first time, they're like, hey, let's get together for a game night. And so I knew what they had in mind as a game night. So I made it that. We did code names and we did wavelength and a couple other party games like that. And they all really loved it. So the next time we kind of started with the party game, but then I moved them into a card game. We did For Sale. And then, something else that was kind of in that same, I think we did, I forget what, Scout or something like that, because it was just 4 of us that time. And those were working really great. So the next time we started with a lighter game, kind of a card game they're all into. I think we started with Nidavellir and they were loving it. And then I had set up on the table upstairs, I had Architects of the West Kingdom, which is it's a Euro game. And it was, of course, some new concepts for people, but they all got into it. Moves fast. It's not really complicated. Once you understand, once you play it a turn or two. So everyone felt like they were doing clever things. And there's that interaction that created fun moments. Oh, you captured my guys. And now that's basically every time we play, midweight Euros, it's this group of 6 people. And I'm just trying to find that, like, Keyflower is a game that we had on the table recently. And so, so I think you start light and just don't expect any more than that, because a party game night can be fun too. And if I'm just doing that with a group of friends and having a great time, awesome. And a couple times I have, started there, pushed over, like, kind of, oh, hey, let's try this card game. And people seemed bored, or they were not interested, or they're like, oh, what is this stuff? Then, okay, we'll just do party games with you guys. It's totally fine to do that. So you kind of got to let people, watch it. Don't force it. I also, a lot of the times though, when I've introduced somebody new, it's like, hey, we're going to play this little game, but then they'll see my game shelves. And if they're really curious, that gets, then I know that they're hooked. If they're like, what are all these games? I've never seen anything like this. Here, let me open this box. Take a look at Side. Look at this beautiful board. Look at these minis that you're working with. If they're like, oh, that's too much for me, I'm out. Okay, cool. We won't pull that one out. But if they're like, oh my God, I need to learn how to play this, and that's happened before, then it's really fun to do. So that's generally, but hey, let me ask you a question, Chris. I pulled you into the hobby, but this was before, when I was less experienced at. I probably made some mistakes along the way. Do you remember what you thought when I first asked you to join me for a board game night, and what you felt after that first experience? Do you have any memories of that?
Was the first time that, do you remember what the first game was that we ever played?
I think it was a Clank. I think I invited you to Randy's house. The three of us were getting together. I think we taught you Clank in Space or something like that.
I don't remember the specific game, but I do remember feeling very much like this couldn't be my thing. I mean, really, that was ironically, that was, and now here we are, years later, and I'm a podcaster and a board game fanatic. So that was my first reaction to it. And I think that's so common for a lot of people. I think, even for the people that get into it, it takes a couple tries, which is interesting because my comment before about there are some people who just never be into it. I think even the people who will be the people who get into it, it often takes one or two tries to actually or one or two different games, one or two experiences to actually find themselves getting hooked. So I think I was very skeptical at the outset, and I think actually you made a good choice introducing me to Clank in Space, because it's a terrific game, great sense of humor. It's got a lot of stuff that even if the rule set was a little heavier than I would have expected, it had stuff that was entertaining, and I think anybody would find entertaining, even if you don't love the actual game itself.
Guys, those are incredibly fantastic tips. I've just been educated in a whole strategy. Like, I'm kind of blown away that you guys actually have this great plan to get them into. I'm definitely taking mental notes.
All right. Last question for today, and that is from Thomas. And he said, if you could have board games for dinner, describe your favorite 3-course meal: appetizer, entree, and dessert.
Okay, I think we did this on some episode before, or maybe we described, our ideal. I think we did something like board games as a 3-course meal or something like that. Anyway, I took this in a different direction. I actually went and found a list on Board Game Geek. Someone made a geek list of food themed board games. So I just went and searched. I think I said food names and board games. So this is the kind of stuff you can find on Board Game Geek. If you're not on there, they have all this kind of nerdy stuff. Anyway, so I use that list to help me make my list. For an appetizer, I'm going to get charcuterie, the board game. A nice plate of charcuterie, some figs, some fruit, some nuts, some crackers, some cheeses. Get all that stuff on a big platter. That's going to be my first game for board game night. Next up, for the entree, if I'm feeling lazy, I'm going to do food chain magnate. I'll just go to In-N-Out Burger or something like that and get burgers and a drink. I guess, there's your classy food chains. You got your Red Robins and your
really classy there.
Super classy.
Make sure to get dressed up when you're going to
Right. I will. Yeah. But if I'm feeling a little bit fancy for my main course, I'm going to get a game called Wok Star. That's WOK Star, like the Chinese cooking dish for stir fry. Incredibly amazing wordplay there. And heard the game is not too bad itself. Wok Star for dinner. And then for dessert, there's all kinds of candy themed games and this, that. But the one with the most delicious looking cover was called Piece O Cake. That's Piece space O space cake. Has this beautiful, looks like something from Great British Baking Show on the cover. Some, I think something like raspberries and this like graham cracker crust on. I don't know what it is, but it looks delicious. That's going to be my dessert. No clue if any of these games are good or not, but that's what's going to be at my 3-course dinner for board games.
I was shocked to see that you weren't joking when you said Charcuterie the board game. There actually is a Charcuterie the board game that's coming out this year, or maybe it's just came out. It's 2024.
I just don't know who eats charcuterie and then has Asian steamed noodles and vegetables and stuff. So they don't go together great. Is all I'm saying.
It's food snob.
No, well, another one you could throw in there to go with your noodles is Steam Up, the dim sum board game. Yeah.
And sweet mess for dessert, right, Adam?
No, don't even talk about it. Race.
All right, so I'm going to take this. I think with the spirit that Thomas actually meant, and kind of give you, kind of give you the way I think of a game night in a similar in a similar manner. And so I'll say that when I'm starting with an appetizer, I like a decent heavy appetizer. I don't want just like just a tiny little carrots and crudité. What is it? Crudité. That's it. I don't want some crudité. But what I do want is enough to kind of get my appetite wet and get the conversation going. And so the board game I'm gonna bring out is maybe Downforce. Just a fun game to get the night started, long enough to give me some substance, make some fun choices, get the trash talk happening at the table. So that's my appetizer. My entree, it's going to be heavy. So for me, let's just say tonight it's Revive. That's a nice meaty game. Classic. Believe it or not, I'm a vegetarian, but I like a meaty game for my dinner course, my entree course,
Nice.
On board game night. And then for dessert, it's got to be a trick taker. That's the best way to end an evening. A little bit brainless, but you got to think just enough. And again, just great interactions around the table, especially a great team trick taker like Tichu. That's a perfect way to end a night. Great dessert course right there.
All right. Well, that's you guys set up a hard act to follow there, but I took it in even a little bit different direction than either of you did, and I'm going to have a themed feast, and the theme for my feast is going to be. I completely flew out of my head. It's like I spent it.
You lost it.
Yeah, I know. I completely lost it.
To me like 3 times tonight.
The theme for my feast is going to be deck building. So for the appetizer, who can guess what I might put in as an appetizer for deck building?
Star Realms. It's got to be
Star Realms.
It's got to be Star Realms. We'll play a couple nice light little hands of Star Realms to get everybody's appetite going. Do a little bit of dropping the space bombs on people. Very, very fun. Very light. Couple hands of that probably take 20 minutes, half hour. Very, very good times. Now, we got to get a little bit heavier for the main dish, but we also want to keep it fun. We want to have some excitement. We want to have some fun. We want to have some chunky decisions to make. So get out those boots and let's play a game of Clank in Space. Second time Clank in Space has come up tonight. So that's a good one to get everybody excited, to get everybody kind of going, really get the juices flowing for the main course of the evening. Now, we want something that's going to fill you up. Any holes in your stomach that might still be there that need to get filled, we're going to fill them up with the last game, which also looks good enough to eat, which is Robot Quest Arena, a nice short robot fighting game where the pieces actually look so good that you want to start chewing on them. They look like they're made out of candy or taffy or something like that. That should wrap it up. By the end of the night, you're going to be so sick of deck building that by the next time you're going to be like, give me some area control, give me some worker placement or something else. But that is my deck building feast.
Okay, I'm going to come up with a serious answer here because in my head, I'm getting the idea for one of our polls to be which of these board game menus sounds the tastiest. This could be a good competition here. So I'm going to do a little California theme. We like to keep it light. We like to keep it healthy here. We want to keep it moving. We're not going to be weighed down by these heavy games in our gut, feeling all horrible after now I have to eat dessert. No, we're going to keep the party going. So first up is going to be something, light, obviously. It could be a little Azul, a little Scout, just something easy. Doesn't matter what it is. A little card game, I'm thinking. People get their minds working a little bit, and then we're done. And then next up, this is like a midweight, but I think it's a little bit lighter midweight, and it's something that's just going to flow. So that's going to be Smartphone Inc. We talked about that earlier tonight. Now I can't stop thinking about it. This game flows. You're going, and before you know it, the game's already over. It's so smooth, such a delicious cuisine, just that texture on the palate. Fantastic. Anybody want seconds? We could run this one back before we go to dessert if we wanted to. For dessert is going to be one of the greatest all-time social get up and trash talk all night long. It's beautiful. It's got incredible art. It's fun for the eyes to look at. It wants to sort of, like that beautiful fresh strawberry cheesecake. It wants to ingest it, right? So I'm talking about Skull, the simple little
Nice.
bid game. And then, you think you can find this many flowers before you hit a skull? No, I'm just going to put this little coaster down. Next person's turn. I'm going to bid 2. I think I can find 2 flowers. And then it goes up like that and around and around. It's a push your luck. It's a very trash talky game. Chris always putting the skull in front of him. Don't pick him. You're going to get skulled. You're going to lose one of your coasters. What a great way to wrap up the night with some shouting and hooting and hollering with Skull for dessert.
That is a great menu. So yes, you know what? I'm going to put up a poll on Facebook and on Patreon and ask people which of the menu items they thought were the best. So after you listen to this, go over and answer that question. All right, cool. That was a lot of great questions from our listeners, and we have a ton more to come. So probably within a couple months, we'll do another episode and answer some more questions. Also, you can come support us on Patreon. Any of our super fan or friend of the show level supporters who get bonus content, we're going to record an answer to one more question right after we get done tonight. And we're going to put a video of that up on our Patreon. So if you want to get some more fun content out there, come follow us and support us on patreon.com/boardgamehottakes. All right. Before we wrap up tonight, I do have a couple reviews to read, and they're related in a way. So I was going to share them both tonight. And again, thank you, everyone. It's amazing how many great reviews we get in on our podcast. It's always surprising. Almost every week I get something, and it just makes my day. The first one was from CP23 over on Apple Podcasts, and they left a 5-star review. The title was Best Board Game Chat to Listen to. This has quickly become my favorite podcast for gaming, and I eagerly wait for each episode weekly. The diversity of interests, playing styles, and opinions make it one of the best to get a well-rounded view of a game or topic. I decided to leave a review after the recent episode. They covered production pet peeves, and the crew mentioned diversity and representation being a big factor for them to table a game. As a Black board game designer and content creator, that made me a super fan and feel welcome. I've got one game out in the market and have more coming with my publishing company. I hope one day the crew will get a chance to play my game because they're the coolest out there. Much love from Memphis.
That's amazing.
Nice.
So that's great, and you know what, you are welcome in our community. So I'm glad that you felt that way, and that's an important part of what we're building here, and we want everyone to be included. I did want to say though, I don't know who this is, so except that I just played. One of our listeners started a Castle of Burgundy tournament on Board Game Arena, and I happened to see that CP23 was one of the players in that tournament. I got knocked out in the top 16, so I didn't make it. I didn't get to play with CP23. But in any case, when you hear this, I would love for you to drop me an email to tim@boardgamehottakes.com or PM me on Facebook, and just let me know who you are. I may already be following your content. I may already know about your board games, but I'd love to hear about some of that. And then in relation to this, we got another review this last week as well. And this was, the title was Keep It Up. And this is a 5-star review from M. Karazim on Apple Podcasts. These are both in the United States. This one said, I'm writing this review in response to a comment that was made in the last episode, Top 3 Production Pet Peeves, where it was mentioned that every time you bring up inclusion in games, you get some negative ratings. I just wanted to counteract that inevitable negative rating and leave a positive review and rating. I've been listening for a couple of years now, and your podcast is the only game podcast that I listen to. I'm female, and I appreciate very much that you acknowledge that it's not just men that play games. I enjoy the group dynamic between Chris, Adam, and Tim so much. Keep up the good work, and I will be a loyal fan as long as you guys keep making the podcast. Again, thank you so much, and so glad that we're glad that you feel included in that. And by the way, I kind of love this because I don't know if you ever follow on Board Game Geek how when a new game releases, somebody will inevitably rate it a 10 before they played it, and then the next person will rate it a 1 to counteract the positive ratings and so on. And you see this ratings war. So I love that our listeners are doing the same thing for us on Apple Podcast ratings. As a matter of fact, we did get a couple 1-star reviews this week. They didn't leave comments, so I can't say for sure it was related to this topic, but since it's the only 2 1-star reviews we've gotten in the last 2 years since the last time we talked about inclusivity on our podcast, I have to assume it may be related. So thank you both for speaking up and letting us know that you like to hear that. I mean, it is important to us that you're included. So thanks for reaching out.
I want to say both of those are incredibly heartfelt. Thank you for putting pen to paper and sending that over to us. It's not lost. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, it means the world to me. Hearing that that the message, the message that we're putting out there, that people actually do hear that and appreciate it. So thank you both very much.
And by the way, aside from these couple of reviews, we had generally really positive feedback on that topic. A lot of people dropped us messages on social media, on Blue Sky, on our Facebook group. And so generally really positive. The couple people that left 1-star reviews, just stop listening. I know you're listening still. But you gave me a 1-star review, so you don't need to listen anymore. If you want to come back, got to raise that up to at least a 3, and then we'll see. We'll talk about it.
Oh my gosh.
All right. Thanks everybody for sticking around with us this week. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.